ENFJs and INFPs have one of the most interesting relationships amongst the 16 types. When together, they combine idealism and realism in a way no one else does. In this video, we're going to break down how these two types get along together and why. Let's get into it. An ENFJ INFP relationship is one of the strongest pairings between all of the 16 personality types. It's especially relationship focused, and there's a lot of interesting dynamics that people don't think about. I'm going to go through all of these different elements, look at them as a golden pair, kind of analyze what that means and how it works, some strengths and weaknesses. If you know this pairing, or you're in this pairing, or you're interested about this pairing, there's definitely going to be a lot of information in it for you. Or if you're just interested in learning about the pairings, let me know in the comments down below what pairings you're interested in. And please like and subscribe as well. So yeah, we have ENFJs and INFPs. ENFJs, of course, leading with these functions. We'll do a quick kind of function breakdown of how these two personality types work and how their functions interact with each other and what makes them compatible, what makes this pairing interesting and kind of is intriguing in a lot of different ways. Between an ENFJ and an INFP, of course, ENFJs extroverted personality types, INFPs introverted. ENFJs NF personality types, INFPs also NF personality types. So a relationship focus, a connection focus, an idealistic focus, right? Taking the future of the intuition and the feeling and the connectivity of the F, of course, and combining those together creates a future focus on relationships. Both of these types share those qualities. Of course, the J and the P more having to do with cognitive order, and we'll get into that with their functions. So ENFJs, they are extroverted feeling hero personality types. They're all about how other people feel, how other people's moods are, other people's emotions are. And so ENFJs are constantly focused on that external connection, on making other people happy, on making other people feel happy. And INFPs have introverted feeling in the hero slot. So both of these types lead with feeling functions. INFPs all about how they feel, about their emotions. So in a relationship between these two personality types, ENFJs are trying to connect with the INFP. They're trying to ask them how they feel. They're going to ask them about their opinions, their preferences, their values, whether they like something, whether they dislike something. That's very important in this relationship, is that ENFJs are going to be examining that within an INFP. They're going to be examining their values, their morals, and trying to mirror them, trying to adapt them, trying to understand them. And the INFP likes that. They like to share their principles, their values, what they feel about themselves, how they feel about themselves, whether they're happy or sad, what they like, what they dislike. And so there's a good connection there because they're both talking the same language, basically. One's trying to access the others, the other is giving it. And when it comes to their secondary functions, ENFJs, they have introverted intuition in that parent slot, which means their desires, what they want. It's that introverted side. ENFJs are trying to be responsible with what they want. They're trying to be measured with what they want, make the best decisions, the best choices for other people, and be very selfless when it comes to those future considerations. When it comes to following their gut, they're trying to do it in a responsible way because it's a parent function. And INFPs understand that and they appreciate that because INFPs have extroverted intuition in the parent slot, which is all about what other people want, what other people are going to do. INFPs are very cautious about what other people's decisions are, and they can be kind of aware of those decisions, and they're going to be a little bit pessimistic about that, a little bit skeptical about what people are going to choose. And ENFJs return this in kind because they're skeptical about their own decision making. And in a relationship, this just means when an ENFJ is pursuing an INFP, they're going to do it in a reasonable way. They're not going to be way overstepping their bounds, way too optimistic about the future, but they're also going to give desire and show desire and do it in a responsible way. But one of the main ways these personality types build their relationship is through their sensing functions, and people might not think of that because they are intuitive personality types, but their intuition is more of a mediating factor. It's something that they're aware of, and they're aware of their gut feelings and their intuitions and their imagination, but they're kind of skeptical. They're a little bit cautious. They're trying not to get overly idealistic. But when it comes to their sensing functions, they can be quite idealistic. They enjoy sharing experiences together. ENFJs enjoy giving experiences, giving sensory experiences, giving new experiences, sharing them, sharing food with them, showing them something new, taking them somewhere they haven't been before, and building those memories together. And that memory kind of bank that's connected between the two personality types is the thing that is very strong in their relationship and the thing that builds over time and creates some level of loyalty and trust between an ENFJ and an INFP. And that's very important. And ENFJs and INFPs, they bond over this. They don't necessarily show desire and get super excited right away, although they can, but it's those built experiences over time that really create that bond. And then we have their thinking functions, right? So they prioritize those feelings. They enjoy sharing emotions that are positive as it's that first function. When it comes to thinking functions, they're a bit more apprehensive. ENFJs are a little bit apprehensive to share what they think. They're a little bit worried. And while they want to share what they think more, they can be a little bit, anxious about that and worried that they're wrong. And INFPs feel the same way. They're worried about what other people think of them. They're worried that other people will think incorrectly or think poorly of them. And so that apprehension goes hand in hand, but that desire to gain more understanding of the thinking realm also goes hand in hand, as INFPs want to unlock that confidence with their reputation, and ENFJs want to unlock their ability to speak freely and speak their mind. And so that kind of goes well together when they grow side by side. Of course, those can become very disconnected if they break some kind of bond. ENFJs then have their own personal feelings as a bit of a nemesis to how other people feel. ENFJs very optimistic about how the INFP is going to feel, but a little bit worried that they're not a good person, a little bit worried about how they feel and their own emotions. INFPs are very similar. They're a little worried about how other people feel. They know how they feel. They know their emotions and their emotional state and their values and what's authentic to them, but other people's values are a little bit more of a worry for them. They're worried they might not align. They're worried they might clash. They're worried they might be opposing. So that's just kind of how it works. And then we have, excuse me. Oh gosh, getting dry in the throat. And then we have the critic functions. So what these types are critical about. ENFJs critical about what other people's decisions are, other people's desires, what other people will want. INFPs also critical of their own wants, right? So as you see, we go down the list, extroverted to introverted, introverted to extroverted. It all lines up both in terms of cognitive order, but also cognitive expressions. So it's just really compatible in a relationship because their thought processes are on the same wavelengths. They're on the same frequencies as each other. And this makes a really good relationship, but it can cause problems when there's disconnection, when one person goes in a very different direction and there's a break from this, kind of telepathy and empathy that these types just naturally have, where they connect on all the same ways. But yeah, ENFJs can be worried about what will go wrong, and INFPs are quite worried about what can go wrong too, right? So there's kind of a compatibility with their critic functions, what they're worried about, and what they're stressed about, and what they're very pessimistic about. ENFJs unaware of their own needs, not too focused on their experience, because ENFJs are just so pure with giving other people experiences, and INFPs are the same way. They're really quite self-involved. INFPs are quite focused on their own experience and understanding who they are and what they're going to do with themselves and what they're going to do with their experience and what they're going to do with their values. INFPs are very internally focused. They can be quite introverted in that way. They're very focused on what's my identity, who am I, right? What am I going to do in my life? How am I going to have my actions align with what I value? What am I going to be loyal to, right? So they're always considering these internal judgments, this internal feedback on how the world's affecting them and who they are. Whereas ENFJs are the opposite. They're very externally focused. They're focused on what do other people like? What do other people value? How do other people feel about this? What are other people going to enjoy? How can I impact others? How can I affect others? And this kind of opposite type of perspective can work in a relationship, but it can also become lopsided, and we'll get into that. But that's how these types kind of function. And finally, with that very last function, ENFJs not necessarily caring what people think of them because they're just so focused on other people's feelings, and INFPs also not necessarily caring what they think of people because they're so focused on their feelings and how they feel about people. So let's take a look at what that means from a linguistic perspective, how these types are going to generally express their thoughts and ideas. ENFJs come from the perspective of, I really want you to be happy with that FE, right? But INFPs are able to give that positive feedback. They're able to say, I'm happy around you, right? They're able to give positive emotional judgments back, and ENFJs really like that. ENFJs are then thinking, I hope my choices are good. I hope I'm making the right decisions. And INFPs are okay with helping them make choices. They're they're good at joint decision making. And when it comes to this personality type combination, they're very good at making decisions together. ENFJs are then excited to show things to them, excited to give new experiences, excited to share their life with them. And INFPs are able to give that feedback. Oh, that was a really good experience. I really enjoyed that food. I really laughed at that video you sent me, and able to have those fun experiences together. ENFJs then have that intellectual apprehension, right? As opposed to their emotional optimism. I'm afraid I'm wrong. I'm afraid I'm not intelligent. And INFPs are also afraid of the same thing. They're afraid other people are wrong. And so these types can try and figure out the truth together. ENFJs then think, oh, what if I'm not as good, right? What if I'm not as good at that as you? And INFPs are thinking, well, what if you're not as good at that as me, right? They're having the very same thought process. And these types can work together to figure out their joint self-worth. And that's where they're going to find it. ENFJs always assume the worst. They're always thinking that the worst is going to happen, and they're trying to prepare for that. And INFPs often can assume that things will go wrong and try and prepare for that as well. So both these types are really good at preparing for the worst case scenario. ENFJs then say, oh, I don't need to do that, right? I don't need to do this because I'm going to do what I want. And INFPs also don't think other people have to do anything. They see people as those with options, people who can make decisions, and that they have intention behind their actions, and that they don't have to do anything. They're always making some kind of choice. ENFJs are then worried that the INFP will think poorly of them, and in general, INFPs think poorly of others as a defense mechanism for their apprehension and their fear that other people will think poorly of them. We're not going to go too much into that. If you want a full cognitive breakdown, I have lots of videos on that as well, but that's how that generally works. But all in all, these types are very compatible because they have very similar views, right? So when it comes to this relationship, ENFJs, they appreciate how loyal INFPs are to them. They want to give them happiness, right? They like that they're able to be heard and have a say, and able to make those decisions, right? And able to say what they think. And they like that their efforts are appreciated. And INFPs, they like feeling cared about. They like having fun experiences, and they can remember those very positively. They like being shown things and given those experiences, and they can be very appreciative of the things and the efforts the ENFJ puts into the relationship. And so, all right, so that's kind of the generic breakdown of their cognitive functions and how they're compatible. What are some strengths of their actual relationship? They have high emotional capacity. They're very romantic. They're very idealistic. They can be authentic emotionally. They can have a very strong emotional connection. And that's one of the kind of highlights of their relationship, is that emotional safe space, that they're going to be nice to each other. They can be responsible decision makers, right? So they're both cautious, they're both careful. They're not going to take dumb risks. They're not going to make silly decisions that will hurt the relationship. So that's a good thing. And they both enjoy those comfortable experiences. And there's a bond of loyalty that happens through time. As they build those shared experiences together, they can become very loyal to each other. And that's really great long term. These types can often avoid being too rude, having harsh criticisms, and they generally rely on the fact that they like each other, they value each other, and that positive appreciation. And they can be open-minded in that way when there's emotions that are expressed appropriately and things are being done kindly and socially. There's that extremely strong compatibility, of course, which can be one of the main guiding forces of the relationship and having it work, is that their interactions are compatible, their values are compatible, right? So they have a lot of similarities in their prioritization of all of these different elements. ENFJs, they help bring INFPs out of their comfort zone and help show them new things and help push them to become stronger and better. And INFPs help ENFJs feel valued and appreciated and seen by the external world, and that can really help them. Both of these types can then feel truly understood and appreciated for their kind of unique perspectives, for their intuition, for their emotional valuing. So that's something that's important, and these types can definitely give that to each other. There's some weaknesses of this pairing as well. These types may have a difficult time bringing up difficult topics. They might have a difficult time, I said that 3 times. They might struggle with talking about things that just aren't desirable to talk about. If things could hurt one of their feelings, if things could make one person upset or feel guilty, they're not going to necessarily want to talk about that. They might avoid some harsh truths in favor of that comfort zone, in favor of what they already know makes them happy. So it can be a little bit of an enabling situation there, as they may enable each other's bad habits, inappropriate things, just to not confront each other, to not cause conflict. And they just want to avoid those negative emotions. They want to avoid bad experiences. They just want good experiences and good emotions and kind of have that gravy train. And they want to avoid things ever getting too dark, but that can be a problem in a relationship if they're not bringing up some of those necessary arguments, some of those necessary disagreements to kind of clear the air. These relationships may become one-sided through things like guilt, right? These personality types may have kind of swings of it being one-sided. The ENFJ may be overly giving to the INFP, right? The INFP may become overly loyal to the ENFJ, and there has to be parity in their relationship. It's very important. An ENFJ must express a kind of responsible selfishness where they're able not to just overly give and overly rely on the INFP for positive feedback, because it can become a lopsided relationship, and that can be a potential weakness. And the INFP must be careful not to build resentment or bitterness towards the ENFJ without expressing that, because that can lead to disloyalty long term. So both of these types need to have open communication for both their needs and experience and the feedback that might be negative, and not just worry about conflict and worry about hurting the other person's feelings and kind of stuffing down their true thoughts and ideas. They have to bridge the gap of their differences. These types are very different than each other, right? They have complete opposite cognitive functions, and they must find a way to bridge the gap. Yes, they're very compatible, opposites attract, but they also want to find ways that they're similar and build upon those things and understand and learn from the other person how to be a little bit more like them in some ways. And they'll want to make sure finally that they are telling the truth, that they are being honest to each other, that they're not lying to hurt or protect the other person's feelings, that they're not avoiding certain topics to kind of find comfort, and they want to, in general, find comfort in sharing those ideas, sharing their thoughts, sharing harsh realities. And if these types are able to not get into an enabling headspace and able to actually bring up difficult topics and share difficult situations, then they're going to be able to make it work in the long term. So that's the general breakdown of these two types in a relationship. If you're interested in any other specific topics, of course, I could talk about how they solve conflict, different personality type combinations. Just let me know in the comments down below. Thank you for watching. If you made it this far, please like and subscribe as it helps the channel. And hopefully I'll make more content like this in the future. And I hope you all have a great day.